The evening settled over the small town like a soft blanket, the sky painted in fading strokes of orange and pink. Emily stepped out the back door of her house, carrying a cup of tea that had already gone lukewarm. She wasn't thirsty. She wasn't even sure why she had made it. Maybe it was just a habit, something to keep her hands busy while her mind wandered. The backyard looked the same as it always did. The grass was trimmed, the wooden fence leaned slightly in places, and the small garden by the corner had a few tired flowers hanging their heads. But to Emily, this place was more than just a yard. It was the quiet center of her life. It was where she had laughed with her husband on summer nights, where she had played with her little boy when he was just learning to walk, and where she now came to feel less alone. She sat down on the old bench under the maple tree. The bench was rough, its paint peeling from years of sun and rain. Her husband, Michael, had built it long ago, using his own hands and his stubbornness. It doesn't need to be perfect. He had said back then, it just needs to hold us. And it had for years. Now it held only her. Emily looked around at the yard, noticing the small details that most people would miss: the faint crack in the stepping stone path, the swing that hadn't moved in days, the bird feeder that used to be full but now stood empty. Each thing carried a memory, and each memory carried weight. She breathed slowly, fighting the familiar heaviness that crept into her chest when she thought of how much had changed since Michael's passing. Her son, Daniel, was home from college for the weekend. She had expected the house to feel fuller, louder, brighter. But instead, Daniel spent most of the day catching up on sleep, reading and checking messages on his phone. Emily didn't blame him. He was young with a life stretching wide ahead of him. Still, she missed the days when he followed her everywhere, asking endless questions, pulling on her sleeve, needing her for everything. Now he barely noticed when she slipped outside into the quiet. But Daniel noticed that night. He had been looking for her after finishing dinner. The house had been too still, the lights dimmed, the silence pressing. He glanced through the kitchen window and saw her figure on the bench, sitting perfectly still, almost blending with the shadows. For a moment, he thought about leaving her alone. She always looked calm when she sat out there, as if she needed the peace. But something about the way her shoulders sagged told him it wasn't peace at all. It was loneliness. He pushed open the back door, letting it creak on its hinges. Emily didn't turn around right away. She knew it was him by the way his footsteps dragged slightly, the way he hesitated before coming closer. "Mom," Daniel said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "Why are you out here all by yourself?" Emily turned to him with a small smile. It wasn't her bright smile, the one that reached her eyes and made Daniel feel like everything was right in the world. This smile was gentle but heavy, as if it carried unspoken stories. "I just needed some air, sweetheart," she replied, her voice low. "This place helps me think. It keeps the memories alive." Daniel walked closer and sat beside her. He had grown taller than her now, his shoulders broader, his face sharper. Emily still saw the boy he used to be, but the man he was becoming was impossible to miss. He sat there quietly, looking at the yard, then at her. He could sense there was more to her words than what she was saying. The maple tree above them rustled as a breeze moved through its branches. The last bit of daylight slipped away, and shadows stretched across the yard. Daniel noticed his mother's hand resting on the bench, her fingers tracing the rough wood slowly, almost like she was holding on to something that wasn't there. "You miss Dad," he said carefully. It wasn't a question, it was a truth he had known for years. Emily's hand stilled, and she drew in a breath. "Every day," she whispered. "But tonight, it feels different. Like the memories are too close and yet too far at the same time." Daniel didn't know what to say at first. He was used to his mother being strong, always the one to comfort him. Seeing her like this, with her voice trembling slightly, made him realize she carried so much more than she ever let show. "I don't want you to be alone," he said finally. "Not like this." Emily looked at him, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "I'm not alone," she said softly. "I have you." Okay. But her words, though true, didn't erase the quiet ache in her tone. The silence stretched between them again. But this time it was filled with unspoken feelings. Daniel didn't push her for more. He just sat with her, side by side, as if his presence could shield her from the emptiness she felt. For Emily, having him there meant more than he realized. She had been carrying a secret for weeks, a weight she hadn't shared with anyone, not even her son. Sitting beside him now, she wondered if she should finally speak it aloud. She wondered if he was ready to hear it, if she was ready to let it out. Her heart beat faster, and she pressed her lips together, keeping the words locked inside. Tonight wasn't just about memories. It was about the truth she had been avoiding, the truth that had followed her like a shadow since the day she received that letter. Daniel noticed the faraway look in her eyes. He wanted to ask what she was thinking, but he held back. He knew his mother well enough to sense when she wasn't ready to talk. Still, the way she clutched the bench, the way her gaze seemed fixed on something beyond the yard, it left him with questions he couldn't silence. And in that moment, as the night wrapped around them, he understood that his mother wasn't just sitting in the backyard because she missed the past. She was sitting there because something in the present was pulling her toward a choice she hadn't yet made. Daniel leaned back against the bench, waiting, giving her space. Emily sat still, her breath steady, but her thoughts racing. The quiet backyard, with its fading flowers and creaking bench, about to hold a secret neither of them could ignore much longer. The night deepened, sky turning into a blanket of quiet stars. Daniel leaned back on the bench, studying his mother's face. She looked calm on the outside, but her eyes betrayed her. He had seen that distant look before, the way she seemed half here and half somewhere else. "Mom," Daniel said carefully, "you've been quieter than usual. Is something wrong?" Emily's fingers tightened around the edge of the bench. She didn't answer right away. For weeks she had been carrying the weight of that envelope, reading it alone, hiding it in the drawer of her nightstand. Then pulling it out again as if it had some kind of hold on her. She had promised herself she wouldn't tell Daniel, not yet, maybe not ever. But tonight, with him sitting beside her, his voice gentle and his concern so clear, she felt her resolve begin to break. "There's something I haven't told you," she finally whispered. Neil turned to her. "What is it?" Emily's heart raced. She reached into the pocket of her sweater. The paper was folded small, but Daniel could see how her hand trembled as she pulled it out. She stared at the letter for a long moment before finally holding it toward him. "This came a few weeks ago," she said. "I didn't know how to tell you." Daniel frowned, taking the folded sheet. "Who's it from?" Her voice caught in her throat, but she forced the words out. "It's from James, my first love. Before I met your father," the name meant nothing to Daniel, yet he felt the weight in the way his mother said it. The name carried history, maybe even unfinished stories. He unfolded the letter slowly. The handwriting was neat, but a little shaky. The ink faded in places as if the words had been written with both care and hesitation. He read the first line aloud softly. "Dear Emily, I don't know if you'll even read this. It's been so many years. But I've thought of you more times than I can count." Daniel looked up, startled. "Mom, this sounds serious." Emily's gaze dropped to her lap. "We were young. Life took us different ways. I never expected to hear from him again. And yet, here it is." Daniel continued reading silently for a few moments. The letter spoke of memories from long ago, their walks by the lake, the songs they shared, the promises whispered under starlight. James admitted he had lived a full life. But part of him always wondered about Emily. He wrote about hearing of her husband's passing and how his heart ached for her loss. He ended the letter with words that lingered. "If you ever want to see me again, I'll be waiting. If not, I'll understand." Daniel folded the paper back carefully, almost afraid of its power. He handed it to his mother. "And what do you feel about it?" Emily held the letter close to her chest. Her breath trembled. "That's the part I don't even know how to admit. When I first opened it, I thought it was wrong, even selfish of him to write. But then I couldn't stop reading. His words stirred something I thought was gone. It confused me." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Do you still care about him?" Emily closed her eyes. "I care about your father more than anything." He was my life, my partner, my best friend. Losing him nearly destroyed me. But when I read James's letter, I felt alive again in a way I hadn't in years. And that scares me. Daniel stayed quiet, letting her words settle. He was old enough now to understand that love wasn't simple. His mother wasn't a character in one of his childhood stories. She was a woman with a past, with choices, with a heart that still longed for something. The night had grown quiet, the hum of crickets filling the air. The stars above shone clear, scattered across the sky like tiny lanterns. Emily sat on the bench, the folded letter heavy in her pocket, as if it carried not just words but the weight of an entire future she hadn't dared to imagine. Daniel's presence beside her felt steady, like a hand holding her in place as the world spun with questions she couldn't yet answer. For years, Emily had told herself her story was finished the day Michael died. She had lived as if her life was only about honoring the past, carrying his memory like a fragile glass she couldn't set down. But tonight, with her son's words echoing in her heart, she realized the glass hadn't shattered. It had simply been waiting for her to see it could hold more than one reflection. Daniel broke the silence first. "Mom, what do you think you'll do?" Emily hesitated, her eyes tracing the shadows on the grass. "I don't know. Part of me is terrified. What if meeting him changes nothing? What if it changes everything?" Daniel leaned back, his voice calm. "Maybe that's the point. Change isn't the enemy. Standing still when you don't want to, that's the real enemy." She let his words sink in. The thought of seeing James again stirred emotions she couldn't name. Hope, fear, longing, guilt, they all pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. She remembered the way James used to smile, the way he had looked at her when they were young, and the world seemed full of promises. Could any of that survive time? Could it survive the life she had lived since then? Her hand went to the letter. She unfolded it once more, smoothing out the creases, letting the words catch the faint light of the porch lamp. Each line pulled her back into memories she had tried to bury, moments that had been pushed aside when life chose another path. "If you ever want to see me again, I'll be waiting." The words burned on the page. They weren't a demand. They weren't a plea. They were an invitation. A door left open after decades of silence. She closed her eyes, imagining what it would feel like to walk through it. "Daniel," she whispered, "I'm afraid people will think I've moved on too fast, or that I'm betraying your father." Daniel shook his head firmly. "People don't know your heart, Mom, and they don't live your life. You do. Dad isn't here to give permission, but if he were, I'm sure he would tell you not to let grief be the only story you live." Emily turned to him, her tears soft now, no longer heavy. "You sound so much like him when you say things like that." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe that's because I learned from both of you. He gave me strength and you gave me heart. Put them together and I guess this is what you get." They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a silence that gave her room to breathe, to think, to let her heart speak. Finally, she whispered, more to herself than to Daniel, "Maybe I should meet him. Not because I owe him anything, not because I'm ready for some great romance again, but because I owe myself the chance to see what life is offering me. I've been stuck for so long, Daniel. Maybe this is my way out." Daniel's hand squeezed hers gently. "Then that sounds like the right choice." The decision wasn't easy, and Emily knew it wouldn't erase her grief. Michael would always be a part of her, always the love that shaped her life. But she also understood something she hadn't allowed herself to believe before: love doesn't end. It grows, it changes, it makes room. And maybe, just maybe, her heart had room for a new beginning without letting go of the old one. She lifted her face to the stars, remembering how Michael used to tell her they were endless. That looking at them was like staring into eternity. Tonight, the stars didn't feel so far away. They felt like they were watching her, urging her on, telling her it was okay to take the step. "Do you think I'm strong enough for this?" she asked softly. Daniel didn't hesitate. "You're the strongest person I know, and you don't have to do it alone. I'll be here every step, whether it works out or not." Emily's chest loosened. For the first time in years, she felt something different than grief. She felt possibility. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't a promise. But it was enough to pull her forward. The night grew cooler, and she rose from the bench slowly. Daniel stood with her, taller now, his arms steady at her side. She glanced at the house, warm light spilling from the windows. It had been a place of memory for so long now. It could also be a place of renewal. She looked at her son and smiled, this time with more strength. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll write him back. Just a letter. Just to see." Daniel nodded, his expression soft but proud. "That's all you need to do. One step at a time." Emily breathed in deeply. The night air cool and fresh. The backyard no longer felt like a place of waiting. It felt like the start of something new. She didn't know what James would be like after all these years. She didn't know if meeting him would bring joy or disappointment. But she knew she couldn't keep living in silence, holding herself prisoner to what-ifs. Her story wasn't finished, and as she stood there with her son beside her, she realized the most powerful truth of all. Sometimes love doesn't come once in a lifetime. Sometimes it waits patiently in the shadows, ready to return when your heart is brave enough to open again. Emily took one last look at the stars, whispered a silent thank you to the husband she had loved, and then held the letter close to her heart. Tomorrow, she would begin again. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, you're not betraying Dad by having feelings. You're human, and Dad loved you enough to want you happy, even if he's not here to see it." Emily's eyes filled, but she shook her head. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to face James. What if it's a mistake? What if meeting him again only breaks me more?" Daniel's voice was steady. "And what if it doesn't? What if it heals something you didn't even realize was broken?" The words hung in the air. The backyard felt smaller now, as if the letter itself had pulled the walls of the world closer around them. Emily stared at the folded paper, her fingers tracing the edges. She remembered the way James had once made her laugh, how his eyes had sparkled with dreams. She also remembered the day they parted. How certain she had been that their story was over. "Life doesn't usually give us second chances," she murmured. "So why now?" Daniel looked at her with a seriousness beyond his years. "Maybe because you're ready to hear it. Maybe because you've spent so long carrying the past that it's time to see if the future still has something for you." Emily turned to her son, stunned. She thought she had to protect him from her feelings, but instead, he was guiding her through them. The letter felt heavier in her hand than any paper should. It was a bridge between two lives, the one she had lived with Michael and the one she had left, unfinished, with James. She looked back at the house, its windows glowing faintly from the kitchen light. Everything in that home carried Michael's memory, from the photos on the wall to the chair he used to sit in. Could she really allow another man's presence into that space? Could she open her heart without closing the door on the love she had already lived? Daniel's voice pulled her back. "Mom, you don't have to decide tonight. But you do have to decide someday. Because keeping this inside, it's eating at you. I can see it." Emily nodded slowly. He was right. The secret had been pulling her apart in silence. At least now she had spoken it aloud. At least now she wasn't carrying it alone. She tucked the letter back into her pocket, holding it close. The night air felt colder, but her chest felt strangely lighter. For the first time since the letter arrived, she felt she wasn't drowning in the choice. It was still hard, still painful, but not impossible. Daniel placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Whatever you decide, I'll be here." Emily met his eyes. Her son had grown into a man, and in that moment she realized he was no longer just her child. He was her anchor. She wasn't walking this path by herself anymore. She let out a long breath, the kind that releases more than air. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered. "You don't know how much that means." The backyard grew quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was filled with something new, possibility. Emily looked up at the stars, and for the first time in years, she didn't just see the past. She wondered what the future might hold, and if she was brave enough to step toward it. The air had turned cooler, and the shadows stretched longer across the backyard. Daniel sat quietly, his hand still resting on his mother's shoulder. He didn't rush her, didn't try to take the letter from her again, didn't push for answers she wasn't ready to give. He just sat there, steady and present, while Emily stared at the ground. Her thoughts tangled like roots beneath the soil. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Mom, I know you've been through so much. You gave everything to Dad, and when you lost him, you gave everything to me. But you never really gave anything back to yourself." Emily blinked, surprised. She had expected her son to comfort her, maybe to tell her not to worry, but not this. His words were sharp but kind, and they cut through the fog of her confusion. "I don't need anything," she said softly. "I've had love. I've had a family. I don't want to ruin what I already carry in my heart." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking at her with steady eyes. Dad's memory isn't fragile. Loving someone else, or even just allowing yourself to feel again, doesn't erase him. It doesn't replace him. It just means your heart is still alive. And I think Dad would want that for you. Emily's chest tightened. She had told herself again and again that moving forward would be betrayal. That the only way to honor Michael was to remain in the space he left behind. But hearing her son say otherwise stirred something deep inside her. "You make it sound so easy," she whispered. "It's not easy," Daniel admitted. "But easy isn't what you've ever lived for. You taught me that. You told me life is about courage, about doing the hard thing because it's worth it. Maybe this is one of those times." Emily turned her face toward him, studying him the way she used to when he was younger, searching his eyes for truth, for innocence, for hope. What she saw now was a man who had grown through loss just as she had. A man who was strong not because he hadn't suffered, but because he had. Her voice trembled. "When your father died, I felt like the world stopped. I didn't know how to breathe, how to eat, how to walk into this backyard without falling apart. And you were so young, but you were the one who kept me going. I couldn't let you see me fall." Daniel's eyes softened. "I saw you stronger than anyone I've ever known. But maybe it's time for me to see you happy too. Really happy." Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. Tears stung her eyes. She wanted to argue, to say it wasn't possible, but deep down she knew he was right. She had been surviving, not living. The wind rustled the maple leaves above them, carrying the faint sound of the town in the distance, cars, voices, a dog barking somewhere down the street. Life was still moving outside their yard, whether Emily chose to move with it or not. Daniel leaned back against the bench, his gaze on the sky. "You know what I remember most about Dad? It wasn't the big moments. It was the way he looked at you, like you were his entire world. And I think, if you were here now, he'd tell you not to let that kind of love end with him. He'd want you to find joy again, Mom. He'd want you to keep living." Emily covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking. She hadn't cried like this in front of Daniel in years, not since the funeral. But this wasn't the same kind of grief. These tears felt different. They felt like the release of something she had been holding too tightly. Daniel shifted closer, wrapping an arm around her. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to decide tonight. You don't even have to meet him if you don't want to. But don't shut the door before you even knock. Don't convince yourself you're not allowed to feel something new." Emily leaned against her son's shoulder, her tears slowing. For so long she had thought she had to protect him, to shield him from her vulnerability. But here he was, giving her strength when she needed it most. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. Daniel gave a small smile. "You don't have to do it alone. Whatever happens, I'll be here always." Those words sank deep into her heart. He wasn't just her child anymore. He was her anchor, her partner in carrying the weight of their family story. She realized then that love wasn't about replacing it, was about expanding. Her heart wasn't a room with only one door. It was a house with many windows, each one letting in a different kind of light. She sat up straighter, wiping her eyes. When I read James's letter, I felt something stir inside me. I thought it was wrong, that it meant I was letting go of your father. But maybe it means I'm still alive. Maybe it means I still have something left to give." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. And if it turns out James isn't what you need, then fine. At least you'll know. But if you never try, you'll always wonder. And wondering is worse than failing." Emily looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, she felt hope instead of fear. Her son's wisdom was more than comfort, it was a mirror showing her that the strength she thought she had lost was still inside her. The backyard grew quiet again, but now the silence wasn't heavy. It was open like a pause in music, waiting for the next note. Emily folded the letter in her pocket once more, but this time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a possibility. Daniel stretched his arms, yawning lightly, breaking the tension with a small smile. "You know, Mom, I never thought I'd be giving you advice about love, but here we are." Emily laughed through her tears. "The sound soft but real. I never thought I'd need it from you, but here we are." The night sky stretched above them, filled with stars that seemed brighter than before. Emily sat back against the bench, her heart still aching but also beginning to heal. For the first time since the letter arrived, she felt she might actually have the courage to open that door to face James, to see what the years had left for them. She glanced at her son, who was staring at the stars with the same quiet strength his father once had. And in that moment, she knew no matter what path she chose, she wouldn't be walking it alone.